Now, one of the phrases in Jeremiah 18:6-11 is if they do what is evil in my sight, which is equivalent to, another way of saying is not listening to my voice. Okay, how does God make his voice heard? Is now the implicit question begged from this text. How is God's voice heard by the nations? And what message, what words, speech is coming from God's voice? So how do the nations hear the voice of God? And what is this voice of God saying to the nations? I'm going to give you multiple texts for this. This is Psalm chapter 19, verses 1-4. It says this: the heavens declare, that is, the heavens talk. It's a voice. It's speech. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech. Uses the actual word speech. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. So there is speech coming from what? It's God, ultimately, but what is the providential means that God's voice is being spoken through? Well, the heavens, the sky, day to day, night to night, and this speech that is coming from God through what he has made, his handiwork. So creation is the instrument, the megaphone that God is speaking through. So God's voice is coming through loud and clear by what he has made. This is natural revelation through creation itself. And this speech and these words are heard. Or said the other way, as verse 3 says, there is no speech from the creation, the skies. There are no words in what God has made, his handiwork, whose voice is not heard. So one, God is speaking through creation. Two, it's not just that God is speaking, every single person hears. It's not just that God is speaking into the void, but people might still be able to find some kind of excuse and absolve themselves of their refusal to listen because God was speaking, but he was speaking over here in the void. He was speaking, in a trench deep down in the ocean, but nobody was there to hear. God was speaking, but God failed in his responsibility to make sure that man actually received and heard God's speech. Well, this passage obliterates that possibility of an interpretation. It says that his voice, not only does it come forth, not only does creation pour out speech. So the implication here is creation is speaking, God speaking through creation, and not just a little bit, but it's pouring forth speech. So God is speaking a lot. Speech is pouring forth, and not only is God speaking and speaking a lot, but his voice is being heard. It's being heard. Now, verse 4, it says, their voice, there being different elements of creation that have just been listed, like the heavens and the skies and the day and the night, their voice, which is the voice of God, but them being the means, their voice goes out through all the earth and their words to the end of the world. So that's one more element that we need to bake into the equation. One, God is speaking. What venue? How? Through creation. Is God speaking a little? No, pours forth speech. So God is speaking a lot. How is he speaking? Through creation. Is man listening? Yes. There is no speech. There are no words of God that come through creation that are not heard. So they're heard. And who hears them? Well, it goes on, verse 4, it says, their voice goes out through all the earth. God's not just speaking to one little corner of the world. He's not just speaking in Mesopotamia. He's not just speaking to one nation. All the earth, their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. So God is speaking. He's speaking a lot. He's speaking through creation. Man hears God's voice, and not just one man in one place in one time, but all men in all places in all times, so that all are without an excuse. Now, taking that and cross-referencing back to Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 6-11, one of the chief things that God destroys nations for is their wicked deeds in his sight, which is equivalent to not listening to his voice. God's voice rings forth to the nations, every corner of the world. His voice is loud. His voice is clear. His voice comes forth, his words, his speech in abundance. It comes forth to all the corners of the earth. Not one person misses the message. Everyone hears his voice, and those who do not listen to his voice, not just on an individual, personal basis, but corporately as groups of people, as nations, if a nation chooses to harden their heart and not listen to the clear, abundant voice of God, which has gone forth, and they have heard, but they choose to reject the message, then Jeremiah 18 is talking to them. It's not just talking to Israel 25 to 3,500 years ago. It's talking to them. It's talking to New Zealand. It's talking to Canada. It's talking to England and France and these states of the United States of America. It's talking to us. God is speaking. And if we do not listen, if we reject the message, God will send disaster. Likewise, any nation whose God is Yahweh will be exalted. So there is blessing for nations today that submit to the Lord, that hear his voice. And there are curses for nations today. It's not a one-to-one ratio. It's not in the same covenantal framework as Israel under the old covenant. I feel like I've labored that point a million times. I'm just being abundantly clear. That is not happening today. It's not a one-to-one ratio as it was with Israel under the old covenant. But to pretend as though God is not intimately involved in the affairs of nations today is to miss so much of the Bible. I don't even know where to begin. That is to unhitch from the Old Testament.